All right, let's dive into a bit of secret history, the kind that's hidden in plain sight. We're talking about your own house.
Oh, yeah.
We're going deep with Bill Bryson's book, At Home, A Short History of Private Life. It'll change how you see everyday stuff.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Salt and pepper, always in the kitchen, right?
Sure.
But why? Or those buttons on suit jackets, ever notice those? Seem kind of useless, don't they?
Never thought about it.
Bryson did. And it sent him down this rabbit hole of history. Basically, the history of everything. We're following his lead, room by room.
Sounds fun. Where do we start?
Guess her in the kitchen, right?
Makes sense.
Heart of the home. Bryson kicks things off with the basics. Rice, wheat, corn. Domesticated all over the world. Can you believe it?
It's amazing. Human ingenuity at its finest.
Yeah.
Imagine figuring that out. Different corners of the planet, all coming up with the same idea.
Right. And of those three, corn, oh man, corn is the star of the show.
Yeah.
Bryson talks about cornstarch. It's in everything. Chewing gum, even gunpowder.
I've heard that. Isn't there a quote by Michael Pollan, I think, the food writer? Something like, corn didn't just get domesticated, it domesticated us.
Whoa, that's deep. I mean, think about it. Corn's in our food, our fuel, our packaging. It's kind of freaky when you think about it.
It really is. But we've got these basic crops.
Mm-hmm.
What about flavor? Spices and all that.
Exactly. Got to have some flavor.
Whoa.
Salt and pepper, the essentials, right?
Can't argue with that. Everyone's got them.
Bryson goes deep on their story, how they became those must-haves on every table. Why those two?
Well, salt, it's always been vital, hasn't it? I mean, before refrigerators and all that, salt was how you kept food from spoiling. Essential back in the day.
Absolutely.
Right.
Bryson actually mentions Henry VIII. Back in 1513, he used like 25,000 oxen for a military campaign, all preserved with salt.
Wow, 25,000. That's wild. Imagine all that salt.
Hard to even picture, right? But salt was about practicality. Pepper, totally different story.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Pepper was all about luxury, status symbol. In Roman times, it was practically currency. By the Middle Ages, pepper reaching Europe had a markup of 60,000 times the original price.
You're kidding. 60,000 times. Wow, that's more than gold.
Seriously. So no wonder the Europeans were obsessed with finding a direct route to those Spice Islands. That's what drove those big exploration voyages.
Oh, right. Columbus, Magellan, and all them.
Exactly. Hoping to, cut out the middleman, make a pepper fortune.
So you're telling me pepper led to discovering America?
It's wild, right? This spice trade was a big deal, but I had no idea it was that influential.
It just shows you something simple, a spice, it can change the course of history.
Totally. And speaking of changing history, there's the Columbian Exchange, that massive transfer of goods between the New World and the Old World. Did you know about 60% of crops grown today came from the Americas because of that exchange?
60%. That's amazing. It makes you think differently about your morning coffee or a simple sandwich, doesn't it?
I know, right? All thanks to those early explorers searching for pepper. History is connected in the craziest ways.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just individual explorers. This spice trade, it gave birth to, giant companies, the British East India Company. They were formed because of pepper prices.
That's right. 1599, merchants got fed up with the insane prices, decided to take matters into their own hands.
And that one company ended up shaping global trade, empires, all because of pepper.
Who knew a tiny spice could have such a huge impact?
It really makes you realize that food, spices, they all have these stories to tell. Stories tied to big historical events,
Exactly. And speaking of food and history, Bryson takes us through how our diets have changed over time, how certain foods, they became status symbols. Get this, in the 16th century, people were obsessed with sugar. So obsessed they'd blacken their teeth to show off how much sugar they could afford.
Blacken their teeth. Seriously, who would do that?
I know, right? Hard to imagine now. But back then, a sugar-coated smile, that was a sign of wealth. Totally different from those times of food scarcity, especially during eras like the Victorian period.
That's true. You have this image of the Victorians, all wealthy and opulent, but a lot of people were struggling just to put food on the table.
And that's where you see those social divides even more. Bryson talks about a Victorian home with 11 different places for serving afternoon tea.
11.
11? That's like taking social distancing to a whole new level.
Right. But it wasn't just about where you had your tea. It was about how many servants you had, what you could afford to eat, even the layout of your house. All those things showed your social standing.
Makes you realize how much those social hierarchies were baked into everything back then, right down to the house itself.
Bryson even describes how Victorian homes were often designed to keep servants hidden. Separate staircases, hidden corridors, the architecture reflected the power dynamics of the time.
It's a glimpse into a world that's so different from ours, but also kind of familiar. It's amazing how much you can learn from a cup of tea or the layout of a kitchen.
It really is. Who knew everyday things could be so revealing?
Our little kitchen tour has given us a lot to digest. From crops to spice wars to social class, there's a whole lot of history packed into those kitchens.
There's definitely more to explore. Where to next?
Well, next, we're getting personal. We're going into the bedroom.
Ooh, getting personal. I'm intrigued.
Get ready for some surprises, the history of sleep, privacy, even the clothes in your closet. It's going to be fascinating. Welcome back to our deep dive into the history hiding right under our noses.
Right inside your own home.
Exactly. We explored those kitchens full of surprises, and now it's bedroom time.
Ooh, the bedroom. A very personal space, you might say.
You would think so.
Yeah.
But what we think of as private, well, that's changed a lot over time. Bryson uncovers some really surprising stuff. Like, did you know for a long time the bed was the most valuable thing in a house?
The bed. Seriously, more valuable than, like, farming tools or something.
Seriously. Today, we just go buy a mattress, no big deal. But back then, beds were a huge investment.
They were handmade, weren't they? Passed down through families and all that?
Exactly. Bryson even mentions Shakespeare. Remember his will, left his wife his second best bed. It wasn't an insult. The best bed was likely this massive ornate thing, a status symbol.
So, like, their version of a fancy car today.
Exactly. Shows you how much things have changed. But even though beds were so valuable, sleeping back then wasn't exactly what we call comfy.
Oh, right. Bryson talks about all his mattress problems.
Feathers. Supposed to be the best, but attracting all sorts of unwanted guests. Hygiene wasn't exactly a priority.
Ew.
There's a quote from some writer in the 1600s complaining about feathers polluted with fecal matter.
Okay, that's enough of that. What if you didn't want feathers?
You could try wool, cheaper, but let's just say it had its own aroma.
And if wool was too fancy?
Straw. Not exactly the Ritz-Carlton. One description was like, pricks under the bedsheet, no thanks.
We're spoiled with our memory foam and pillow tops. But speaking of sleep, privacy wasn't really a thing, was it?
Nope. Sharing beds was totally normal, even when traveling. Bryson tells this great story about Benjamin Franklin and John Adams,
The founding fathers sharing a bed.
stuck in some inn, forced to share. And they bickered all night about the window.
Classic. Can you imagine? Two brilliant minds cramped in a tiny bed, arguing about fresh air.
And it gets even crazier. Kids, servants, all sleeping in the same room as the parents or masters. Separate bedrooms, a luxury few could afford.
Wow, that's a lot of togetherness. No wonder we're so obsessed with personal space these days. From shared beds to master suites with walk-in closets.
What a change. Speaking of closets, Bryson dives into the history of clothing materials too.
Like linen and hemp.
Those are the go-tos for ages. But wool became a big deal in the Middle Ages. Warmer, tougher, and its production, that was a huge part of the economy back then.
So before the Industrial Revolution changed everything for textiles, it all started with sheep and wool.
Exactly. Laying the groundwork centuries earlier
Mhm.
makes you think differently about those sweaters in your closet.
Our bedroom journey has given us a lot to think about.
From straw mattresses to sleep privacy, it's a whole new perspective on those everyday things.
And there's still more to explore. What's next on our house tour?
We're heading outside, into the world of gardens.
Gardens. What's so historical about gardens?
You'd be surprised. We'll uncover the history of plant hunting, those risky expeditions to find new species.
Ooh, like Indiana Jones, but with plants?
Exactly. And the rise of those perfectly manicured lawns we see today. Get ready for some botanical espionage. Welcome back, deep divers. We've explored kitchens and bedrooms.
Uncovered all sorts of hidden history.
Now it's time to step outside.
Ah, fresh air. The garden.
Seems peaceful, right? But even here, Bryson finds a whole hidden story. It's a tale of adventure.
An obsession.
Totally. And maybe a little bit of botanical espionage.
Ooh, now that sounds interesting.
Bryson talks about the lengths people went to bring new plants back to Europe.
Like plant hunting.
The golden age of it. Botanists and adventurers risking it all to find exotic species.
In those far-off, unexplored places.
Imagine the Amazon rainforest, the Himalayas, the South Pacific, all those unknown plants.
Must have been exciting, but dangerous too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Bryson describes wild animals, hostile tribes, diseases, all for a new flower or maybe a valuable herb.
Driven by the thrill of discovery.
And the potential for profit, let's not forget.
A rare plant could mean fame and fortune.
Big competition among those early plant hunters. Some even resorted to, let's say, creative tactics to get those sought-after plants.
That's where the espionage comes in.
Exactly. Bryson tells this amazing story about Robert Fortune,
Robert Fortune.
a Scottish botanist, sent by the British East India Company on a secret mission to China.
To China. What was so special about China?
Tea. China had a monopoly on tea. The British wanted to break it.
Ah, so Fortune was a tea spy?
Basically, he disguised himself as a Chinese merchant, went undercover in those tea-growing regions.
Learning their secrets.
Cultivation, processing. He even smuggled out thousands of tea plants and seeds.
Wow. Talk about a high-stakes heist.
And he pulled it off. Those stolen plants ended up in India.
Creating those huge tea plantations?
Yep. Changed the global tea trade forever. So next time you're having a cuppa, think of Robert Fortune.
I will. What a story. Did he do anything else?
Oh, yeah. Fortune introduced chrysanthemums and azaleas to Britain. They became super popular in gardens.
So those expeditions really did bring an explosion of new plants to Europe. All those exotic flowers and trees.
It was a whole new world for European gardeners. They built greenhouses, hired gardeners, competed for the best collections.
Everyone wanted a piece of that exotic world in their backyard.
Right. And it wasn't just for the rich anymore. Bryson mentions this book, Practical Instructions in Gardening for Ladies.
Encouraging women to get involved.
Exactly. It was a big hit. Gardening became a fashionable hobby for women of all classes.
So gardens, they reflect our changing relationship with nature.
From practical kitchen gardens to those elaborate estates with exotic plants.
Our desire to cultivate, to control.
And, of course, to appreciate nature's beauty. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
From kitchens to bedrooms to gardens.
Who knew everyday things could hold so much history?
Bill Bryson certainly opened our eyes, makes you look at your own home in a whole new way.
It's amazing what you can learn when you start digging deeper. So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
A final thought.
Those historical trends we talked about, food, privacy, our relationship with nature, how are those still shaping our homes and lives today?
It's a great question, one we should all ponder as we go about our day.
So keep questioning, keep exploring. There's a whole world of hidden history out there. Until next time, happy deep diving.